What were you doing?
Well, I was traveling across the United States, across the northern latitudes of the United States, with a great unsung genius whose name is Randall Carlson. Randall Carlson is a self-trained geologist, and he knows more about geology than any multiple PhD at any major university in the United States. He has been living and breathing geological mystery for the last 4 or 5 decades, and he's deeply into the mystery of the cataclysmic events that occurred in the northern latitudes of North America at the end of the last ice age. And you know, it's understood now broadly by geologists, there's no doubt about this, that there was cataclysmic flooding at the end of the ice age. And this flooding is, here's the conventional theory, that the ice cap, these ice caps that covered North America were 2 miles deep, you know, mountains of ice.
Right where we're sitting.
Right where we're sitting, and a little further south, and right across the whole of the US-Canada border, and north of there, these gigantic ice caps. The conventional theory is that glacial lakes formed in the ice cap. There was meltwater, and that huge lakes formed. They did form, there's no doubt about that. One of them was called Glacial Lake Missoula. And the argument is that after a certain buildup of water, the ice dam that held that water in place broke, and Glacial Lake Missoula spilled out its contents over the surrounding lands, causing the unmistakable evidence of gigantic floods that we see there. And the conventional view is that Glacial Lake Missoula refilled with water and emptied out maybe as many as 40 times over thousands of years. Randall Carlson has for a long time been suggesting another possibility, that a comet hit the North American ice cap around 13,000 years ago and instantly liquidized all of the water bound up in those ice caps, releasing a vast amount of it in floods that poured down across the North American continent, and a vast amount of it going up into the upper atmosphere as vapor, which then fell as rain. And this is not just any old rain, this is a black bituminous rain filled with particles and mud and ash and dust. It's a horrendous rain that falls because the comet unleashes enormous amounts of heat, you see. And furthermore, when you take the weight of those 2-mile deep mountains of ice off the land is destabilized. We live in an earthquake zone in the United States, particularly in the west and the northwest. And what you get is seismic activity. As the burden shifts off the land starts to rebound under it, and the plates start to separate, and you get a huge amount of volcanic activity. So volcanoes are spewing ash. I mean, would make the last eruption of Mount St. Helens look like a drop in the bucket. You know, giant amounts of ash are going up into the upper atmosphere. It's a truly cataclysmic scenario that Randall envisages. He was alone in envisaging that scenario. Nobody believed there was a comet until from 2007 onwards, the scientific evidence began to come in bit by bit that he was absolutely right, and that a comet did hit the North American ice cap, and we can say exactly when. Within, give or take 5 years, it was 12,980 years ago. It was fragments. This was a comet that broke into fragments, and some of those fragments might have been as much as a kilometer in diameter. 4 or 5 of them hit the North American ice cap. It flew on a diagonal course through the Earth's atmosphere and impacted with the European ice cap as well. And that's why simultaneously in Europe and North America there was dramatic meltdowns of the ice cap. So what Randall has been saying, and what the new scientific evidence is proving, is that it wasn't multiple emptyings of glacial lakes. It was a single cataclysmic event on a gigantic scale, which changed the whole world that we live in. North America was at the epicenter of the cataclysm, but it was a global cataclysm. That dust that was thrown up into the upper atmosphere shut out the sun's rays for more than 1,000 years. The Earth plunged into a period of darkness and extreme cold, which geologists have known about for a long time. They call it the Younger Dryas, but they didn't know why it happened. Why did the climate change so radically at that moment? Just when the Earth was coming out of the Ice Age, suddenly it goes back into an extreme cold, which is colder than the deepest phase of the Ice Age. And we lose all the megafauna, the mammoths, the mastodons, the woody rhinos. They all go extinct at that time. obviously something happened. Now we know what it was. It was a comet impact. Randall Carlson was right all along. The new scientific evidence, it's called the Younger Dryas boundary field. They're finding nanodiamonds. They're finding layers of platinum in the Greenland ice cores. It leaves no doubt whatsoever. There's been a debate about it, but the debate is over. We were hit by a huge comet 12,980 years ago. It wiped out the megafauna, and I believe it's also the smoking gun that lost us a whole advanced civilization of prehistory that is remembered in myth and legend and tradition all around the world. And this is why I've made this journey with Randall. He's been showing me the features on the landscape. Anybody who can get to Washington State in particular, it's really intriguing. I must emphasize that this event occurred across the whole of the northern parts of North America, but it's particularly evident in Washington State. Over here on the East Coast, you can see it in the scablands of New Jersey, the Finger Lakes of New York State. These are all caused by that same flooding. On the west side in Washington State, there are again gigantic areas of scablands. Why called scablands? Because they look scabby. The ground, the basalt basis of the ground has been plucked and picked, and bits of it stand up and bits of it are hollowed out, and it just looks a mess. That was all done by flooding, no doubt about it whatsoever. Features like Grand Coulee in Washington State, upper and lower Grand Coulee, like somebody of a gigantic size, miles tall, has taken a huge chisel and just chiseled out the earth, creating a corridor 50 miles long and 2 miles wide, which goes down hundreds of feet into the earth. This was all caused by that flooding. It's not just water that's coming out. These floods, they're ripping out whole forests by the roots. They're taking icebergs with them. The icebergs contain, in many cases, huge boulders. There's one at Wenatchee, which weighs close to 18,000 tons, which is perched 500 feet above the valley floor. Why? Because it was in an iceberg, and that iceberg grounded against the side, what was then a hillside, and stuck there, and gradually afterwards the ice melted away, leaving the boulder in place. So you've got a flood that's jostling with gigantic heavy icebergs, that's filled with ripped up forests, that's filled with huge amounts of silt and sediment. It's a churning, massive, solid flood, and it causes these really dramatic erosion events on the landscape. Between upper and lower Grand Coulee is a place called Dry Falls. I would urge anybody who has the chance, go see Dry Falls. Because there we have a huge dry waterfall. It was a living waterfall during the flood. Today it's all dry. It's 5 times wider and 3 times higher than Niagara Falls. Wow. Niagara Falls is the result of thousands of years of erosion that have created those falls. Dry Falls was created in 2 weeks. It was created in 2 weeks by this horrendous flooding unleashed by the comet impact. And it's just stunning to observe it and to imagine what went on there. So I've had the privilege of doing this journey with Randall, seeing the landscape through his eyes and really getting it, really understanding that we were here in North America at the epicenter of a global cataclysm that changed the world and changed the story of human civilization.
That's just incredibly fascinating. Not even just fascinating, but leaving the boulders out, and how else could that possibly get?
Yeah, there's
no other explanation.
These are they're called glacial erratics. That's the only way they get there. The rock that's dumped on those valley sides came from hundreds of miles away.
And it must have been pretty fast.
Fast, yes. These floods were moving at colossal speed, and they were 1,000 feet deep. It was a truly terrible event. So we have the smoking gun that I believe lost us a whole civilization, and at the same time, there's a huge amount of new archaeological evidence coming out. These are the reasons why I'm writing a sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods. It's a wholly new book. It's not an update of Fingerprints. It's going to be called Magicians of the Gods. We have Gunung Padang in Indonesia, where I've now made 3 research visits, a pyramid that is currently in the midst of excavation at the moment. And the evidence that's coming up from the carbon dating is this place is more than 20,000 years old. Nobody is supposed to have been building large-scale, 300 feet high pyramids 20,000 years ago. Our ancestors are supposed to have just been, primitive hunter-gatherers. And likewise at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the German Archaeological Institute over the last decade has unearthed an incredible site of Stonehenge-sized stone circles that was deliberately buried by whoever made it 10,000 years ago, like a kind of time capsule. But the work started 2,000 years before that. That site is 12,000 years old, and again, that's the Upper Paleolithic. Our ancestors are not supposed to have been in a position to create large-scale architecture 12,000 years ago, and it calls into question the dating of many other megalithic sites around the world. Göbekli Tepe is special because it is a time capsule. It was deliberately buried. There's no doubt about the carbon dating. Other sites like Menidra in Malta or Stonehenge itself, they've been tramped over by many later cultures, and it confuses the carbon dating record. I think we're going to have to look again at our whole picture of history. I think we're poised on the edge of a revolution in our understanding of the past.
If we think about the Twin Towers, after they're knocked down, we rebuild.
Yeah.
So what ancient people do on sacred sites, rebuild.
They rebuild. They rebuild again and again. Many sacred sites that we're looking at, for example, Angkor in Cambodia, what we're looking at is simply the latest incarnation of a lineage of temples that had been built on that site going back thousands and thousands of years. And we'd be wrong if we thought that the latest incarnation defined the actual date of origin of that site. It's much older than that.
Graham, this is just mind-blowing. You are a master with words. I don't know if that was it's taken a while to get to this point.
I've been working with words most of my
your
adult
ability
life.
to write, talk, research. You're Indiana Jones.
Thank
right?
you. Thank you. I love a line from the Indiana Jones movie. You know, I'm 64 now.
Okay.
And there's a moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark where Indy is looking really wrecked, you know, and he's sitting there in some cabin in a ship with his lady, and she comments on his appearance, and he says, "It's not the years, it's the mileage."
Yeah, I would say that's one of the better quotes, better movies, and that's what I think about. I'm like, Graham Hancock is even doing more ridiculous things than Indiana Jones, put him to shame.
Well, thank you for saying that. I've put in some mileage over the years.
You have.
That's for sure.
But this has been a fascinating interview. We're going to be pushing War
Thank you.
God, please. And is there anything else you wanted to tell them?
No, I think we've covered the ground. I
really-
hugely enjoyed this conversation. It's great to talk to you, and I look forward to meeting again.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
I really appreciate this.
My pleasure.
Peace out, guys. Wow.